In this chapter, chapter 23, we're looking at the manager's performance, or I like to entitle it a leader's performance, and also the balanced scorecard, which we'll see what that is in just a second. In this chapter, we're appraising a manager's performance or leader's performance. Our goal is to see if what the leadership is being more efficient and effective with the tools that he or she is given. Now, it's huge importance in measuring performance. You want to be able to see if the goals are being met on a corporate and a organizational level. You want to be able to determine who's achieving and underachieving, and you want to be able to find out if there is better and more productive people that can be in this role to make an organization better. And you want to reward good performance, and you can't do that without evaluation. So look at this segmented income statement. If you look at the bottom line in this particular organization and you look at the sales number, these are in thousands. But if I told you that these were in millions, you would say as an organization, wow, we're doing great. We're averaging, we're not averaging, but we have $560 million in sales, and we have a net income or an operating income of $38 million in this organization. That is tremendous. That's wonderful. But once you look at it in a segmented state and you look at sailboats division, the motorboats division, and the repair division, you see the repair division is actually taking a loss. Now, is it a way that to make the repair division profitable? Possibly. That's something that you may want to look at. And if not, then is it okay that you're carrying this loss for this particular business? And a lot of times with repair divisions, there are losses that occurred, but it's a necessary function of other divisions. So, but being able to look at this in this way will allow the leader, CEO, CFO, etc., to make ultimate decisions about the overall performance of each unit, and then for the leadership to know where he or she stands in an organization. In every organization, there are centers. There's a revenue center, cost center, a profit center, and investment center. And I say that in every organization. That is not true in every organization, but that is true in most organizations or larger organizations. And I'll describe in some detail what these centers represent. A revenue center is exactly what the name implies. It's responsible for creating revenue. Typically, there are a few costs that are associated with that because it is driven by people and driven by processes designed to generate income. So the revenue center is any center that has a specific focus in generating consistent revenue for an organization. Now look at these two examples. Both examples are of how a revenue center would look inside of a manufacturing company. So in a manufacturing company, the salespeople who negotiate prices with clients and suggest additional products for a customer would be an example of someone working to generate revenue for a manufacturing company. And the salespeople that do that would represent the revenue center or the revenue generating entity in a manufacturing company. So you'll see that correlation. In a retail company, the revenue center, of course, will be the managers or the salespeople on the front line that's responsible for selling product. If you walk into a big box retail store, the people that are on the sales floor would be part of the revenue center. Now, a cost center is responsible for all the costs that are occurred in a particular organization. Any unit that does not directly generate income for an organization is considered a cost center. For example, R&D R&D is not a revenue center, even though the product of R&D will produce revenue, but the actual R&D center itself, research and development, does not generate revenue. The product does. HR does not generate revenue. They're a necessary entity in an organization, but are not directly revenue generators. And so anything that's not directly related to revenue is what we're known as a cost center. Now they're profit centers. Now profit centers, I made the first bullet best used as self-contained divisions. Profit centers are designed to generate profit. Now when we look at revenue centers have income, revenue coming in, but they have some expenses associated with that. Profit centers are designed to generate profit for a particular organization and minimize losses, as we'll see shortly. So now, for example, a hardware store may be divided in these departments. Look at these examples of a hardware store: tools, sporting good, lawn, automotive, hardware, building supplies. Now, the manager of this store may separate each department as its own profit center. So they would run independently and not use collective resources. So that way, this leader or the manager would be able to look at each individual unit to see whether this particular unit is being profitable or not. And investment centers are made by upper level leadership and are responsible for revenue, costs, and the investment funds. Those are decisions that affect the company at large and are specifically designed for long-term growth and sustainability for an organization. Now, the decision to acquire another business would be a decision made by an investment center, or to expand operations, or to grow one entity or the organization over another. All are examples of investment center decisions. So now, when you evaluate performance, you look at the center, and then here you'll see how a particular center is evaluated. Revenue center is evaluated by actual sales compared to budget. Here's what we budgeted. Here's what our actual sales are. Does it meet expectations or not? The cost, same way. Cost center. Here are the actual costs that we expected to incur. Here are our actual expenses. How do they measure up? How do they balance? Profit center. It looks at the actual segmented departments compared to a budgeted segmented margins. And an investment center compares the comparison of the actual and budgeted return on investment or residual income. Investment center looks at investments from a perspective of how much revenue this long-term asset will bring. Other things that this investment center may measure are the things that we've looked at in our class so far: net present value, or accounting rate of return, or potentially internal rate of return. Now, there is something known as the Balanced Scorecard, or the BSC matrix, and there are 4 dimensions of this matrix. And there's the financial perspective, a customer's perspective, internal business process perspective, and the learning and growth or the innovation perspective. The Balanced Scorecard looks at an organization from these 4 perspectives, and it is designed to bring balance to an organization. It was created so that leaders in the organization will not look at just one aspect of business to determine whether they're being successful or not. A lot of organizations lean toward financial profits or the financial perspective, but will forget about learning and innovation and how important that is, and investing in current and future innovative ideas for the business, and continuing to pour into those that it employs. So this scorecard asks these questions. 1, how do we look to our shareholders with a financial interest? 2, what must we do to continue to excel? And what do we do well that we excel at? 3, how can we continue to improve and create value? And 4, how do our customers view us? You see on this example how the idea is that this is a continuous cycle of improvement, and to making sure that the objectives, targets, there are measurements in place, and there are initiatives in place in all 4 phases of business. Chapter 4, budgeting for service organizations. Now, service organizations are not very different from that of a product-based organization. How the difference is that there you don't see many investments in products or external materials, because the primary product is a service that's being performed. One thing to note on this slide is that only receivables are regarded as important current assets. Now, there will be some long-term assets, of course, depending on your business. For example, if you had a limo service, then the limo itself will be considered a long-term asset. But the current asset that you are concerned about is the exchange for service, which will be the cash receivable for that particular service. Unlike a product-based business where you would have or produce merchandise, then your merchandise would be a current asset as well, because you can sell that for future income. Not the case normally with service organizations. As you'll see, there's not a lot of difference in the budgetary process for a service organization and a product-based organization. One of the things that is central will be bullet point number 3 or number 3, where you want to develop a cash budget. Cash budget measures all receivables that will come into a service-based organization. Your cash budget will be the lifeline for the particular organization. And in service-based organizations, liquidity is immensely important, because that is the how you receive revenues on an ongoing basis using service organizations primarily. So something that's very important, that you establish a cash budget, and you're able to develop statement of financial position and test that against the standards. And the standards are usually the industry standards that's set in that particular field or area. Now, for example, an airline or hotel industry, it is very difficult to predict sales and average unit price in this particular service organizations, because you're dealing with perishable items. And in this particular industry, the hotel industry, there's so many variables. You have competition, you have the price of gasoline, you have unions, and you have other variables that you have to play in both of these industries. So your goal is to maximize revenue per flight or per room. The demand for service can vary widely, and you want to make sure that you monitor that closely. And projected sales in this industry and most service industries are done on a daily, monthly, and annual basis. So they're done a lot more frequently than a product-based business. Now here are some budget elements for a service organization. Chapter 25 are nonprofit organizations, and a focus in nonprofits. So there are various types of nonprofit organizations, as you'll see here, and as you know. Of course, nonprofit organizations are primarily supported by volunteers. And example, private schools, churches, etc. They are organizations that are supported through tax assessments. They're state-supported schools, governments are examples, and organizations that operate primarily for the benefit of others as supporters. For example, country clubs are community-based organizations. A 501c3 is a type of nonprofit that falls under this jurisdiction in law that makes a company eligible for tax exemption. Now, most nonprofits actually fall under this category in the IRS, but not all. All nonprofits are not 501c3 organizations, but this gives this particular organization the ability to exempt taxes for the purpose of doing business to support the community. Now, for a nonprofit organization, there is a forecast of services that need to be rendered for a budgeted period. Because once again, these organizations exist not to not make profit. That's kind of one of the misconceptions with a nonprofit. Their purpose is not that they make a profit, but their purpose is that their profits will go toward the betterment of the community and society as a whole. So one of the major focuses in nonprofits is the forecasting. So the section that we looked at in forecasting will be very central to projecting demand in particular areas for nonprofit organizations. Other big responsibility for a nonprofit is to anticipate sources of income and where those sources are going to come from, whether it's grants, whether it's some other type of public funding, whether it is going to be a particular something that is being used as revenue in order to generate income for the organization. Whatever that is, then you want to identify them and you want to anticipate your expenses needed for that entire year, because there are certain regulations depending on your business that your profit margins need to be in order to be a viable nonprofit. Planning is huge in nonprofit, especially for those that are applying for grants, for those that have boards, for those that are serving particular needs. You want to make sure that this particular nonprofit organization has very well defined objectives and you have a strategy for accomplishing them. And then you have to have the people and processes in place in order to implement a successful plan for how you're going to accomplish these tasks. Here you can just look at some of the processes and the planning process as a whole. And you want to address these type of questions. What are specific needs? What are the actual responses to existing programs and things that we have? Is there a gap or is there a problem that needs to be fixed? All the questions that have to be addressed in the planning process. And here are some examples of sources and types of funds to be generated. Nonprofits, maybe even more so than a for-profit organization, is that every dollar must have a name on it. There needs to be very little variance in reporting in this particular organization because the organization is monitored very heavily by government organizations, especially if the organization is a 501c3 and receiving special permissions that would require them to pay taxes. However, efficiency and effective measurements are difficult to attain, but it is very important to be as accurate as possible and have tools in place to do so. Below are some income examples for nonprofits. For involuntary hospital, you'll see that those are some potential forms of revenue. And for a college and university, typically how revenue is generated. As a wrap up of chapter 25, and this is the last chapter in this course, the goal of a nonprofit is to provide services. Success for nonprofit is measured about how well it is contributed to the overall public well-being of the community it serves. And I want you to know that nonprofit organizations include governmental and nonprofit entities. And if you are able to effectively budget, you will allow a nonprofit to serve its primary goal, and that is to serve the community, serve the people, and make an impact in the community in which the nonprofit exists. Hope you've enjoyed this chapter, and I hope you've enjoyed the class.